Good afternoon. We're waiting for two more panelists, and since they're a little bit delayed at the airport, we'll proceed. Welcome to the opening of the Midwest Symposium for the Assassination of John F. Kennedy, including lectures relating to the assassinations of Robert F. Kennedy and Dr. Martin Luther King. Sitting behind me are panelists who are going to be speaking throughout this weekend, and as I call their name, I'd like them to stand up and acknowledge their presence here today. Dick Gregory, activist and co-author of the book Codename Zorro. Jane Riscani, who's on her way. That was Oliver Stone's research coordinator. Ed Asner, who was one of the stars of the movie, is also on his way. George Michael Avikia, author of And We Are All Mortal. Jerry Polikoff, assassin researcher and media critic. Robert Groden, who we have all seen on TV, co-author of the book High Treason, JFK, The Case for Conspiracy. Jim Lazar, president, Assassination Archives and Research Center. John Judge, founder of the Committee for an Open Archive. Dr. Charles Crenshaw, coming out of the closet, author of the book JFK, Conspiracy of Silence. Dr. Cyril Wicht, autopsy expert, forensic pathologist and consultant to Oliver Stone. Dr. John Newman, author of the book JFK in Vietnam. Deception, Intrigue, and Struggle for Power, and myself, Craig Zerbel, author of the book The Texas Connection. At this point, I would like to call on George Michael to read a short statement for you.
Thank you. The representatives of the Third Decade Research Organization and panelists assembled for the Midwest Symposium on the assassination of John F. Kennedy today, 1, called for release of all U.S. government files relating to political assassinations, 2, decried recent changes in proposed legislation to open the files, 3, challenged political leaders and presidential candidates to go on record regarding this issue, and 4, denounced the recent Journal of American Medical Association, or JAMA, article on the JFK autopsy as a fraud. The organization calls for release of any and all government files relating to the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King, and accessibility by experts to all physical evidence in these cases. The organization criticized recent legislative changes that narrow which files will be open and compromise the selection of a proposed review board which will oversee the process. The group expressed its shock and dismay that the KGB's files on Lee Harvey Oswald may well be released before our own CIA files, documents owned and paid for by the American people. These sealed documents and evidence represent our own history and should belong to the people of the United States, not to any government agency. The group noted that the vast majority of the American public believes there was a conspiracy involved in the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and that neither the Warren Commission investigation nor the House Select Committee on Assassinations restored the public's confidence that its government will seek the truth in this case. In this connection, any attempt to limit public release simply to those files generated by these failed investigations can only serve to further undermine the public trust. The meeting serves as a warning to candidates for all public office that the will of the people demands a commitment to opening the files. The group challenges political leaders to recognize the overwhelming desire of the American public to resolve this vital national question. The group calls the recent JAMA article confirming the alleged legitimacy of the JFK autopsy a fraud, and identifies it as the latest attempt to cover up the true facts in the case. Third Decade Research Organization is a group of independent researchers and concerned citizens committed to the continuing search for the truth about political assassinations in the United States. Thank you.
We'll now take a few brief questions from the audience, if there are any, or from the press.
You said that releasing these files is in a vital national interest. Why is that? What's vital about it?
I'd like to turn that question over to Jim Lazar, president of the Assassination Archives and Research Center in Washington.
Well, I consider it vital because we have an unresolved question as to who is responsible for the death of the President of the United States. And that issue goes to the legitimacy of the transfer of power that occurred in 1963 when Lyndon Baines Johnson took over from President Kennedy. The American people are very disturbed that we do not know, after 28 years, the answers to the questions surrounding his death, and they feel very strongly that they have a right to know.
But once the movie JFK came out, for instance, there was a burst of news programs, stories written in the paper, radio, television, all about this question. There appeared to be some sort of movement toward the opening of the files, but as happens in a lot of issues, that was just a burst. Not much has happened since then, and it seems to be out of the public consciousness now.
No, well, I disagree with that assessment. Congress is moving forward with legislation. It has not, the legislation does not contain all of the things that we would like, but it is nonetheless going forward, and it will result in a very substantial amount of information being released. While the public attention to the issue is quiescent at the moment, or more so than it was, my organization feels on a daily basis the pulsation and throbs that come from the American people. We, since prior to last fall, we probably got an average of 4 or 5 phone calls a day. From last November through March, it was 25 phone calls a day. We're still getting a very substantial number of phone calls and inquiries and people who come in to use our archive. There is a great deal of activity that is there, and I'm confident that once the files are released, that activity will only increase.
I mean, granted, this is asking for a little speculation, actually a lot of speculation, but what kinds of information do you think is contained on some of the documents we haven't been able to see?
Well, I'll give you two answers to that. The first is that, of course, we cannot know the great mass of the material because it's been withheld from us. But there are some things that we do know. We know, for example, that the House Select Committee files contain a 375-page staff report on Lee Harvey Oswald's activities in Mexico City prior to the assassination of President Kennedy. That is obviously a very important document and one that must be released. Secondly, we know that unlike the Warren Commission, the House Select Committee had its own investigating staff. And that staff interviewed people, took depositions, obtained documents, and there is a world of material there that did not find its way into the published volumes of the House Select Committee, and certainly given the enormous volume of materials here. When we speak about the House Select Committee probe on the JFK assassination, we're talking probably in excess of 500,000 pages of documents. There is bound to be material there that would be of interest to researchers. Most importantly, the release of the materials will show how the House Select Committee operated and performed. It will enable scholars to evaluate what it did, when it did it, whether it did what it should have done.
Some of the key questions raised in the movie quoting from the dialogue here, why was JFK killed, who benefited, and who had the power to cover it up? Do you think the release of this information would definitively answer any of those questions?
My personal view is that it is unlikely that there will be any smoking gun. There will be accumulated bits and pieces of information. I expect that there will be important information that we don't know about, but no, I don't expect that there will be a smoking gun that will resolve the assassination. It would be naive to assume that somebody who conspired to assassinate the president would write it down on a scrap of paper and leave it in a government agency.
Do you think there will ever come a time when most people will be satisfied with the kinds of information that is out and the kinds of theories that are drawn?
We don't know. It's very hard to predict the future. It depends in part on how much information gets released, how much is withheld, and whether or not it appears that the information that is released is substantially all that there is, and that there is not the possibility that other documents not covered by the legislation could shed light on the case.
Dr. Crenshaw
Yeah.
up there?
Yeah.
Can you tell us, you were
The Doubting Thomas?
the emergency room in Dallas?
Yes. I was a third-year general surgery resident at Parkland on November the 22nd, 1963.
What was it that you saw?
Pardon?
What was it that you saw that day that maybe didn't come out to public?
Well, the first wound I saw on arriving in the trauma room 1, the first wound I saw in trauma room 1 on rushing there was the entrance wound in the neck. It was small, round, demarcated, about the size of your little finger. It was an entrance wound in any trauma surgeon's estimation. The other wound that we saw at Parkland was this large wound here in the back of the head, the parietal occipital area here, about the size of a baseball. It was an obvious exit wound. And those are the two wounds we saw at Parkland. We did not turn the president over. We did 3 cut downs on him. I did the one on the right leg. We did 2 chest tubes on him, both anterior and posterior, and Dr. Perry did the tracheostomy over the entrance wound in the throat.
After your book came out again, there was a flurry of activity, lots of reports, people trying to track you down and talk to you. Are you satisfied that, or would you like to see a little bit more public concern or outrage as far as getting more documents released, or all of the documents?
Absolutely. Every place I go, I try to embrace all of the people that we talk to about supporting the Boren-Stokes resolution, because I don't think that we'll see, as Mr. Lazar says, a smoking gun, but I cannot help that we won't find out the cover-up. Now, that's all I can talk about, what the wounds were at Parkland and what the pictures show to me. I do not know and have not studied, such as these people in their scientific efforts, about the president's death. But I can tell you what I saw at Parkland. And also I can tell you what all of them said at Parkland, and there was the hole in the back of the head. And the autopsy picture has no longer got the hole. Some of my friends have now said that this one picture is because the scalp is being held up, that they're not seeing the hole that we all described. However, they do not see the other picture where he's being held up, and there again, in the right side of his head, there's no hole. The disappearing wound, I think that this would bring out anything in the American people. They should want to find out how this cover-up occurred.
Is this the picture that was shown in JAMA?
Yeah. No, I'm not sure about JAMA. It's Lifton's book, our book. He's being held up and they're measuring there. This is the best picture of the back of the head, which shows no damage. Some of my friends at Parkland say the other one with right ears here and they're holding it up, that this covers up the wound, and they can accept that, which I think is kind of ridiculous that they can accept this, even though the scalp is being, oh, here it is right here. You see, this right part of the head, this is where the hole was. It's gone. And how do you...
So,
The hole, we lost the hole between Parkland and Bethesda.
What are some of your objections to the JAMA article? How does it differ from your recollections?
Well, those pictures for one thing right there. Also, the idea that there was supposedly this wound is an entrance wound and the hairline in the back, supposedly this is where, small entrance, big exit, supposedly this is where it came in and then comes out the front. Well, that was ridiculous. All 14 of us looked here, and we did not see this wound here at the back, the small one. Not only that, this hole that was here that all of us saw is no longer in the picture.
The picture here on the right is what the doctors all saw and described, every single one of them, without exception. But the autopsy photographs presented by the government to the House Assassinations Committee show the rear of the head to be totally intact. Every
McClellan's drawing, isn't it?
this,
Yeah.
this was done by one of the doctors, Dr. Robert McClellan,
Bob
who was
McClellan.
standing right by the president's head.
Now, whose picture is this one on the right, on our right?
This one here?
No, the photograph.
Okay, this one here is,
Government autopsy
this is the
photograph?
official photograph given by the government to the House Assassinations Committee and all of the medical panels who have formally looked into this investigation. And every one of the doctors,
That's somebody else's head, or?
everybody, every single one of the Dallas doctors, every nurse, the autopsy people in Bethesda, Mrs. Kennedy's statements herself, every one of them said that this photograph does not represent the president's head. The man who took the photograph said this is not an accurate photograph. This is not what he took. It's a doctored photograph. It's a photographic matte insertion. The high contrast area in the center has been added photographically to the entire back of the head.
You would be able to tell that with certainty, though, wouldn't you?
You can. You absolutely can. Stereoscopic views of different photographs taken in this series show that there's a flattening to the rear of the head instead of the natural round curve, which is evident in the rest of the photograph.
And the official version places
They pushed the wound up forward,
exit wound where?
up here. And his face was not marred at all.
The official, the
frontal
film,
part is there.
the film of the assassination shows that same exit wound in the back of the head in exactly the same spot as Dr. McClellan's drawing and Dr. Crenshaw's recollections.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Good, Jerry, I'm sorry. The autopsy photographs and x-rays don't match each other. The photograph shows the front of the face to be totally intact with no damage whatsoever. But the x-ray shows the entire area on the right side and the front of the head, from the front of the forehead to the ear, and from the top of the head down to the ear, totally missing. This cannot be. The photograph and x-ray were taken a few minutes apart from each other, and they show two separate sets of wounds. The government refused to accept the fact that the doctor's recollections were correct. And Dr. Crenshaw being there is absolutely right. According to every single witness, the rear of the head was gone. The government, the House Assassinations Committee, based their entire investigation of the medical evidence on this one photograph. And they won't accept the fact that it is a forgery, even though the man who took it said it was fake.
What's your name, sir? What do you-
Robert Groden. I was staff photographic consultant to the House Assassinations Committee and the author of the book High Treason. I was the staff photographic consultant. I testified to them about this, and they buried the testimony.
I think you know that we're having long sessions with all of these people, and you're going to hear Dr. Crenshaw, for example, at length, and you're going to hear Robert Groden at length. I want to add two things to what can we find in the files, and I'd like to ask Dr. Cyril Weck to make some comments. I know what's going to be found in the files. In the 285 boxes, the House Select Committee on Assassinations material that was sequestered, there are dozens and dozens of reports from researchers from around the United States, including about a dozen reports sent in, written by people now sitting on this platform. I sent in two, and before G. Robert Blakey took over and contained the investigation, Henry Gonzalez's staff called me twice ecstatic about two reports I sent in. One on the spectrographic evidence invalidating the single bullet theory, indicating CE-399 had nothing to do with the assassination. That's in the boxes, all right? My own report. Number two, I sent in a report on the second, at least one second Oswald. Again, the staff called me and said they had separate corroboration that indeed we had identified a second Oswald. Reports like that, which we sent in to Henry Gonzalez and Richard Sprague before G. Robert Blakey took over the House Select Committee on Assassinations, is what the American people will finally see when those files are opened. Now, let's hear from Cyril Ruck on the autopsy materials.
A few things very quickly, if I may. It is particularly appropriate here in the great city of Chicago to point out that George Lundberg spoke for the Journal of the American Medical Association as its editor, and not for the American Medical Association. I've been a card-carrying member of that organization for 36 years, and I've never received a ballot asking me to vote on the Warren Commission and Lee Harvey Oswald's role or any other aspect of the assassination of JFK. Lundberg, I charge formally here, and I've stated this before, deliberately permitted news media in this country and representatives from around the world to leave that conference that he held back on May 19th, what was the date, May 19th, with the mistaken impression that the AMA had addressed this. Number two, despite this stickler for detail appellation, which his crony Dennis Brio, one of his paid writers, gave to him, he was anything but a stickler for detail. He starts off by saying there are two people and two people only in the world medically who know everything about this case, and he tells you about Humes and Boswell. He does not tell you that there was only one pathologist there who had any background or training of a limited nature in forensic pathology, Pierre Fink. Dr. Fink chose not to participate in this latest charade, and Dr. Fink is available. I spoke with him on the phone just 2 weeks ago when Dr. Crenshaw and I had invited him to attend our news conference in Washington, D.C. Lundberg says that Humes and Boswell have not addressed this matter heretofore. I was on the program, which I have always referred to as CBS Whitewash 1 with Dan Rather in 1967. That was followed by 2, 3, and 4, and of course I must confess my ego keeps getting me sucked in on national television. I can't say no, and each time I write a scathing, blistering letter to Dan Rather, and the next time I hear from some new producers that are with him at the time, and I say, do you know what I said to Dan Rather back then? They say no, and I say, okay, he's inviting me again, let's do it one more time. Well, on that program in 1967, Humes was on. When I was a member of the Forensic Pathology Panel of the House Select Committee on Assassinations in D.C. 77 to 79, Humes appeared before us and testified. And Boswell has been public with this before, and indeed is quoted at length in at least a couple of books which are present on the subject. But I want to show you what Lundberg's personal agenda was. I want to show you how really, really rotten that presentation was. There was a panel of 9 forensic pathologists. I was the lone dissenter, 8 colleagues on the other side. But they are all board-certified forensic pathologists, competent, experienced, solid guys in the field. One's dead, that leaves 7 of them. Here's Lundberg. He wants to tell you that the Warren Commission is right. What better foundation could he possibly have? What would this doctor, this pathologist, reach out for that would be better for him than to go to at least some of those 7 forensic pathologists, the chairman of which is located in New York City where he held his news conference, my colleague and friend, Dr. Michael Bodden. Lundberg didn't go to Michael. Lundberg didn't go to any of the other forensic pathologists. Lundberg's personal agenda was to whitewash Humes and Boswell. He wasn't interested in the truth. And can he be such a fool as to stand before the news media and repeat, as he had to do later, a Larry King show and other instances, and say, well, he had not talked about the single bullet theory. He had not talked about John Connolly's wounds, but he nevertheless concluded that the Warren Commission was right. That's like saying I did a book on World War II. I didn't want to talk about the Nazi army. I just wanted to talk about World War II. And now he comes forward and he tells us that Humes and Boswell were right. He pats them on the head, dusts them, takes them from the shelf, brings them before the American public and says, look what we found. It would be as if Pat Buchanan said that he interviewed Gordon Liddy and E. Howard Hunt and determined that the Watergate burglary really was okay. It would be the same thing. That's great news, isn't it? That's what Lundberg did. He interviewed Humes and Boswell and says that everything is all right. The doctors with Dr. Crenshaw in the emergency room identified cerebellar tissue. Now, those of you who took any science course in college, and if I showed those of you who have not one picture, certainly a demonstration of actual tissue, the difference between the cerebral hemispheres and the cerebellum, you will remember it always. There is a definite difference. These experienced surgeons who have worked in that Parkland Hospital for a long, long time, they said they saw cerebellum. Now, then, they have backtracked. There's a very, very distinct difference between cerebellum and cerebrum. References have been made to the House Select Committee on Assassination. Just for those of you who have gotten into this recently, very quickly, you should be aware of the fact that Richard Sprague, one of the foremost criminal trial attorneys in America, had been the original executive director, and it was pushed out when he wanted to approach this as a real homicide investigation. He really wanted to bring in homicide detectives and some assistant DAs and really do a job. And they pushed him out, and they brought in Robert Blakey. And just want to add one thing and then sit down and let my colleagues get up here. You were asked, you asked the question, you have been asked among yourselves, and it's a very legitimate question about what will we learn. While I agree with my longtime friend and colleague Jim Lazar that you're not going to get a smoking gun in terms of a memorandum that says kill the president for this reason, it was not the subject of a board of directors meeting of the CIA or a staff meeting any given day. I do believe that what you will at least achieve is an opening of the door, a proof that there was another human being involved. Now, whether that person was another shooter, which all of us believe, whether that person was somebody who helped orchestrate things for Oswald in any fashion, we know by definition we're talking then about a conspiracy. And at that point then, it is mandatory under the criminal code of the federal government of any and every state and territory of the United States government to make a move, because then we have an outstanding murder, and there is no statute of limitations on murder, whether it's you or me or the president. And at that point then, Jim, I suggest, then things will begin to unravel, as they did with Watergate, as they did with Iran-Contra, as they did with the SNL scandal, as they have been going on now and will further unravel with the Iraqi situation and the bank in Georgia, etc. It will begin to fall apart. And you will see the rats scurry for cover. You will see them as they try to leave the ship as it begins to sink. That is the reason that we've got to have all of the records disclosed. And I sure as hell hope that they will not be subject to up matter during the course of its 2-week stay in a bucket of formalin. That is the brain, folks, which has been missing since 1966, which I first pointed out in 1972. And so if there be any representatives here of the august news media, like the Washington Post and the New York Times and CBS and ABC and NBC, I urge you, I implore you, I beseech you, I beg of you to join us in the quest for the missing medical and scientific evidence, the brain, the microscopic tissue slides, and the Kodachromes. That will unravel the case.
Now I would like to introduce activist and world-famous actor Ed Asner. Let's also bring up Jane Rascani, too.
This is awfully intimidating to find that a doctor gets stronger ovation than me. I am so unused to that. I'm in somewhat of a shock and speechless, but I'm delighted because it proves that this was not a wasted trip. I am not a JFK assassination expert. I was delighted to be in the movie and to help ignite this this fire that now burns amongst all of you and hopefully throughout the country, and will ignite our supine Congress into opening the files in an unbesmirched way. I'm delighted to be here, and I hope to learn by all of this. Thank you. Jane?
Hi, I'm Jane Rosconi. I was the research coordinator for Oliver Stone's JFK. And we're thrilled that JFK could be a big part of urging the case to go forward with the resolution in Congress, with conferences like this. And we hope that the debate that we helped ignite a little bit more continues. And whether people liked or didn't like JFK, we were very pleased to get, I guess it would have to be tens of millions of people in this country and many more millions worldwide talking about important issues. Now, if only our politicians could do the same. Anyway, it's great to be here, and we're looking forward to what happens with this, and we hope that the media takes note of what these people have to say, because they've been saying it for going on 28 years now, and it's time that they were really heard. Thanks.
Mr. Gregory, would you like to say a few words?
Let me just say that I thank and praise God for this day and for your movie, and I hated to see the way the press and the official folks trashed Oliver Stone, but now he know what the rest of them feel like. As long as you can do movies and being an African American born black, 60 years, I was damn near 45 years old before I realized that Cleopatra wasn't white because of the movies. I didn't realize that Hannibal wasn't white because of Victor Mature. You can do all that, and that's okay, but the minute you come out with some facts, then you don't have artistic freedom. I want to leave you with this. One day the truth will come out. And you'll find out that the CIA and the FBI and a bunch of people who a sick, insane society only would respect, you'll find out that they did things that would make Hitler blush. Information. Money is not power. Education is not power, but information is power. And you're looking at some folks sitting up here and some folks you'll see tomorrow, and you're looking at a movie that gave the whole world more honest, ethical information than the news media, controlled on certain things. I look at these mics, if we was up here doing some silly rap talking about sex, the mics would have got louder. All at once, we talking about something very important, they all blow out. And so I just say to those who's here and those that's the cause of us being here, and thanks to you and Oliver Stone, had it not been for these folks sitting here, it wouldn't have been an Oliver Stone movie. And then we want to say thanks to those who lost their life. These are the fortunate ones. A whole lots of news people who wanted to tell the truth is dead. And finally, to those of you in the audience who work for me, I'm talking about the CIA and the FBI. Since I pay your salary, I don't pay news media salary, but my tax money pay yours. I hope y'all stick around for today and tomorrow, because you'll learn more being around honest, ethical people than you would ever learn back in your office where they hide stuff. You will see truth, but don't go back and ask no questions, because you will be dead.
We still have two speakers to hear from. I'd like to ask John Judge, I respond again to that question, why open up the files, and what might we find in the files? John Judge.
I co-founded the Committee for an Open Archive last November before the movie came out, and we've been surprised and pleased with the tremendous groundswell nationally. We have a national petition to open the files, and people from all over the country have picked up the petition and sending back to us by the thousands. And there's definitely a majority of the public out there that want to address this issue. And we're trying to do what we can in order to get at these files. If you want to take the cynical attitude, and I don't discourage cynicism in this case, because much of what was important in the files was destroyed before it even entered a file. A lot of physical evidence, and not only the ballistic evidence, but for instance the car that Kennedy rode in was taken back to Dearborn, Michigan, and the parts gutted out of it and rebuilt before even any ballistic work could be done on where the bullets went within the car. And there was not only destroyed real evidence, there was planted false evidence. The gun switched from a German make to an Italian make gun within 3 days. And other evidence like fingerprints seem to have been planted in the situation. So a lot of the hard evidence, as well as witnesses within a short period of time afterwards, were gone. So whatever went into these records of the government investigations of the case were already flawed by what was missing. On the other hand, I don't believe that it necessarily is going to be what Norman Mailer suggests, like leaving a Mercedes-Benz on the Upper East Side of New York for 20 years and coming back to see what's there. Because the people that worked to perpetrate this cover-up in the beginning are no longer in those agencies. They no longer sit as the bosses of the people who will be reviewing these files. And we know, just from the files that have been released by the work of people like Jim Lazar and other researchers through the Freedom of Information Act, over the years have cast additional doubt every time on the conclusion of the Warren Commission, and they've shed light on the cover-up that followed. So you can take that to that there's nothing in the files, but in fact, I believe that the independent research community, if they get their hands on these files, will tell us that there's a great deal in those files, because it's independent citizens and researchers like the one he's sitting up here, and many sitting in the audience today aren't up on the podium but have done good work on this case, who really have forced it open and know the case inside out. A cursory review by the media, most of whom don't even know the basic issues in the case, is going to come up with a conclusion that there's nothing there because they don't know what to look for. But the experts in the case and the independent researchers will be able, if they get access to these documents in a timely way, to give that information back to the press and to the public about what's there. That's why our committee doesn't want an additional independent prosecutor or independent counsel or a new congressional investigation, because those methods have already failed us in the major scandals of our time. We believe that only the people, who Thomas Jefferson saw as the ultimate repository of power in the society and the only ones who really could be left with that power to decide, should be in a position to have an informed democratic process. And you can't have an informed democratic process in a situation where the history of the country is a commodity owned by the national security state.
Bring us all up to date on where the effort to get the file stands at this particular moment.
There were a number of bills introduced right away in January, most of which were not taken seriously by Representatives Slaughter and Gonzalez, Traficant, that have not been talked about in the press and probably should be. Gonzalez's bill, the best of them all, although its scope only was the House Select Committee documents, would have ordered those documents opened within 30 days after its passage, with no further review, with no kind of national security or other excuse to hold the documents back. Instead, the Congress, out of politeness and procedure, have waited for the bill from Congressperson Stokes, who headed up the House Select Committee on Assassinations and was one of the main movers, along with Mr. Blakey, in making sure that the documents of that committee, which cover both Kennedy and King assassination, were buried in the first place. As much as he may dismiss it now, Blakey also insisted on a gag rule on all the staff members of the House Select Committee, so that for the rest of their life they couldn't even talk about the investigation that they themselves did.
They're only covering up personnel files too, remember?
Yes, right. No files of substance, but we know, it was mentioned before, the 375-page report by Mr. Lopez on the staff there. Lopez told us, he's a member of our advisory board, that when he went to see his own file and discuss it with Mr. Blakey, that meeting would happen in a closed room, and a CIA agent would be the third party who'd show up in physical possession of the file and let him look at it and talk about his own file to Mr. Blakey with the CIA present, and then close the file up and the CIA would take it back. And this is the process for the staff themselves. So Blakey and Mr. Stokes and Arlen Specter, who has taken on 2 Hills so far, Gene Hill and Anita Hill, in about as brutal a way, and who devised the single bullet theory, went with a draft of this bill to who? To Mr. Sessions and Mr. Gates. Sessions has an earlier involvement himself in both the Martin Luther King case and the Kennedy case in his role as a judge, and that should be looked into. And Mr. Gates, although he squeaked through the Senate confirmations, clearly had a role in the cover-up of the Iran-Contra scandal. And these two people were basically asked, can you live with this bill? And if you'll cooperate with it, then we'll bring forward the bill. So that's the bill, Senate Joint Resolution 454 and House Resolution 282. They're a joint resolution that's going forward now. And basically, I believe, the tail wagging the dog. In other words, you're going to pass a bill as Congress to tell the intelligence agency to release files. The first thing you do is go to the intelligence agency and ask them whether they're willing to. Should we go to criminals and consult them about what laws should determine their behavior? Is that the way that law is made? But it is in this case. And so this is the law we're getting, 2 or 3 more year or more additional delay, a review committee handpicked by the president, and the ability to postpone release of a document, segregate sections of a document and release it, redact, that's the intelligence community word for erase, parts of a document, and hand it out, summarize a document, and in the early version, even substitute one document for another and release a substitute document. Why? Because it would be in accordance with a full disclosure. In other words, if you want full disclosure and you can't release a document for national security reasons, well, release a substitute, at least it'll get close. And under the name of freeing the files, we have a situation where the files are one more time going to be sanitized. But this bill, for all of its faults, will still open the first door to literally millions of documents that will come out should it be passed. It's out of committee in the Senate. It's already been voted out in amended version. Most of the House committees, of the 4 that it was referred to, have voted it out. The Government Operations Committee may still have an amendment pending before it's voted out of their committee. They may adopt some new rules, which unfortunately were not for the better, and then the bill will go to the floor and eventually some joint version, maybe this session. And that will at least begin a process. We should be aware, and the press should be aware, that all along there are documents sitting waiting to be read. 50,000 pages of FBI documents that were released. I talked to Gus Russo, one of the researchers today, about 24 cubic feet of materials over at the Justice Department that he just went through the other day that were released. There's a historical documents review process going on for the last couple of years under a State Department law, and hundreds of pages of just the titles of the files relating to the Kennedy assassination and Oswald at the CIA have already been released from classification under this and haven't yet been looked at. The history of this country, of the Cold War and World War II, is so vast within the secret files that it was reported in a recent book that just the classified documents on our own history of World War II and the Cold War afterwards are kept at Suitland, Maryland in a special military archive in 27 underground vaults. That these vaults are packed from floor to ceiling with documents relating to that hidden history. And that each of these vaults is an acre in width. I mean, that's like the last scene in Indiana Jones when they're carting the Ark of the Covenant off to the hiding room. I mean, there's a reality out in Suitland that the history of this country, since the time the intelligence agencies came to be, is buried under the ground someplace. And along with it are not only what happened to the House Select Committee and the Warren Commission, but more importantly, the files within the U.S. intelligence agencies. And I don't want to just mention FBI and CIA because in my analysis the more important files are in organizations you don't hear the names of for the most part. The DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the ONI, the Office of Naval Intelligence, Army Intelligence, the other military branches, presidential documents in the libraries and in the foreign policy papers of the presidents and other places, all of which still pending release, even in these presidential libraries, would shed a great deal more light. There's enough out in the record, if you want to go and read it, to solve the case. But the principle is that we own the history, we paid for it, we paid for these investigations to be done, and we should demand the ability to at least see what they came up with, even if it's just a pack of lies. At least there'll be lies that we can hold on to and we can challenge. What good does it do for doctors from the Kennedy autopsy to come forward now and tell us about their conclusions regarding autopsy materials that we still can't see? Why can't independent forensic pathologists get access anytime they want to those documents, carry on further ballistic tests, or do other things with these hard physical evidence pieces? Instead, as in the old days of the Catholic Church, at one point, only the priest could read the Bible, and then the priest would tell the people what the Bible said, and you couldn't print the Bible. And so, similarly, we have official autopsy experts telling us what happened to the autopsy, but still the Bible of the hard evidence has never been released to the people that need to read it or could read it intelligently and interpret what it meant.
We haven't heard from a couple of people that I think I'd like to hear myself talk about why John F. Kennedy most probably was murdered. But I think there are other aspects to that question, and I think they go to, in fact, the principal reason that we're here. So I'm going to ask Jim Lazar, president of the Assassination Archives and Research Center, and the leading freedom of information lawyer in the United States, to respond to your question, too.
Well, I think the question, as I understood it, was the status of the legislation, and John is correct that the initial proposals that were seriously considered were the joint resolutions introduced into the Senate by Senator Boren and into the House by Congressman Stokes. Those have now been altered by substitute proposals. The Senate Committee on Governmental Affairs yesterday passed a substitute proposal. The House will consider a different substitute proposal, and then there will be a vote in each house on the bills. And because the bills differ, there will have to be a conference committee between the two bodies to try and straighten out what the final language is going to be. So the process is fairly well along. I would anticipate that it's likely that there will be a vote either this summer or next fall, that there will be legislation passed this term of Congress. There are flaws in the legislation as I view it, but there are it is nonetheless very important legislation, particularly because the Freedom of Information Act has, under the impact of the Reagan-Bush administrations and the Reagan-Bush judiciary, been greatly subverted to the extent that now you can only get a small portion of what you could get under the Freedom of Information Act in the 1970s. So it's very important that the legislation pass, even with its flaws, because it certainly will result in a great deal of additional material, much more than we've been able to get under the Freedom of Information Act to date.
We know, of course, that JFK was assassinated. There was a major attempt, a very obvious major attempt, to also assassinate the movie JFK. So I'd like us to hear from Jerry Polikoff, who knows the assassination, an expert in the assassination itself, who knows the media, he's a media person and critic himself, and who knows the film JFK. Jerry Polikoff.
I think one of the greatest tragedies in this case is that we just haven't been able in the past 28 years to get the media to act responsibly. And I think one of the best examples is a recent example that Dr. Wecht has talked about and Dr. Crenshaw has talked about, and that's the JAMA article. It's hard to find even a defender of the Warren Commission that defends the autopsy report. Usually the best you'll hear from even the most vociferous defenders of the Warren report is they botched the autopsy, but they got it right. And in 1967, I believe it was, the American Academy of Forensic Sciences said that the autopsy didn't meet the minimal standards set out by the Academy. All of a sudden, here we have the Journal of the American Medical Association publishing an article by the autopsy doctors saying everything was okay, we did a great job. Then we have a press conference, and lo and behold, these doctors that have now given this great interview, first time in 28 years, which is also a lie, as Dr. Wecht pointed out, the doctors aren't there because they've said everything they have to say. Can you imagine if Dr. Wecht gave an interview to a major American magazine and basically said, I know absolutely and I can prove that the autopsy photos and x-rays have been altered, they're forgeries. And then there's a press conference and Dr. Wecht isn't there because he said everything he has to say on the subject. The JAMA article was on the front page of almost every newspaper in the country. The New York Times did an editorial saying, see, we told you so, everything's been okay. Lead story on most of the evening news is that night. It's a non-story, and how in the world can these guys elevate something when the doctors that are being talked about aren't even there. And these doctors will never subject themselves to a public forum where they can be questioned. And I can't think of another subject where the news media would have stood for a situation like that, where these sources of these major new revelations aren't there to discuss them or defend them. And that's really been the history of this case. The problem with JFK, as far as the media was concerned, I don't think there's ever been a movie that's been vilified to the degree that JFK was, and I really think the problem with that the media saw in it was not that Oliver Stone was rewriting American history, but that Oliver Stone was rewriting the rewriting of the history that the media had perpetrated on the public. And it's about time that the media began being responsible and covering this case responsibly.
Anthony Summers, who wrote Conspiracy, followed a trail, U.S. intelligence trail, that led to Lee Harvey Oswald and to Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby, for example, we know, worked for the Chicago Police, the Illinois State's Attorney's Office, the Bureau of Narcotics, the Dallas Police and its Special Services Bureau, and for the FBI. And that may only be a beginning, because he also had CIA connections, both direct and indirect. So we know that there is a trail of U.S. intelligence, but there's also an organized crime trail, a very obvious one. We begin with Ruby, which is what G. Robert Blakey began with in order to state his case. We've also known that the man who most benefited from the assassination, who became President of the United States, very clearly was in deep trouble in the Bobby Baker case, in the Billy Saul Estes case. And the Bobby Baker case can be traced directly to people like Sam Garfield and Ed Levinson, both people working for example, Meyer Lansky. That's the man that we think very possibly, at the very least, may have been an accessory before the fact, and very possibly, again, an accessory after the fact. And so what we're going to hear at greater length on Sunday is talk about the possible involvement of LBJ, but I'd like Craig Zerbel to make some comments right now about that possible involvement.
Interestingly enough, when Dr. Crenshaw did go public with his observations, and all of the media sources disclosed that to the public for the first time, it seems that everybody forgot to read his book. Because when you get to the end of his book, he formulates his own opinions, which are that Lyndon Johnson was involved in the assassination. And that's what my book is about. I am speaking Sunday, late afternoon. We've been sitting here a long time. We have one person left. And that's John Newman, who talks about John Kennedy in Vietnam. As such, let's have John talk for a little bit, and then we'll be able to break our panel up and talk to the reporters individually, and we'll get off the podium to do that. Okay?
I really don't have any prepared statement, but there are a couple of things I'll say very briefly here. One concerns the files and what happens when we open the files, and number two concerns the major thesis of my work, and one which was central to the movie, and that is policy reversal between Kennedy and Johnson on Vietnam. Now, first of all, about these files and destruction of evidence. With respect to policy, and Vietnam policy in particular, there's been a systematic destruction of evidence, of files over the years. Most notable in the Pentagon Papers, where there's a virtual black hole surrounding the last 3 or 4 months of the president's life. That's no secret to researchers of Vietnam War history or of assassination research. We've known about this for a long time. In my own research, which focuses on Kennedy's Vietnam policies, 61 to 63, obviously, I was shocked to be told by a very senior, high-ranking Army general, a very famous general. He was Patton's G2 in World War II, and it was also our intelligence chief under Westmoreland later, that some of his files, his own personal papers, were still being destroyed in the 1980s. Nonetheless, it is the files that permit, for example, the major theses of my work to carry. Not only the lying and the intrigues that went on in the administration with respect to Vietnam policy, the lying to President Kennedy on the one hand and a secret back channel to the Vice President on the other hand. But even in the area of Kennedy's withdrawal plan, his order to withdraw, we now have files that were released only less than a year ago, files from the National Security Council, which broaden our understanding of the meetings that were held and the decisions that were made. So to be totally pessimistic or cynical, I think, would be short-sighted. We need to get this process started now and let the chips fall where they may. In the area of policy reversal, I hope that we're on a verge of a new threshold here. We need to change the way we define this issue. Up to now, people have tried to put the onus on those who would say that Kennedy was getting out of Vietnam. What we really need to say is that Johnson did in fact reverse Kennedy's policy. This is an historical fact. We can talk about what Kennedy would or would not have done because he did not live. But we must couch this argument in terms of would Kennedy also have changed his own policy, which was to withdraw. That's the way that this has to be defined. We have now heard in the wake of Oliver Stone's film, practically every major official in the Kennedy administration still alive, other than Walt Rostow, and I'll mention him in a second. And that would include Hilsman, his Assistant Secretary of State, and others, even McNamara to a certain extent on Larry King, talk about the withdrawal plan as a real viable plan. This is not some kooky idea constructed years later by friends of Kennedy. And before he died, General Taylor, Kennedy's chairman of the Joint Chiefs, also talked about the withdrawal plan as a serious plan. In essence, we have been treated to a wholly false notion of the interchange between Kennedy and Johnson on Vietnam policy. That is, that Johnson simply continued Kennedy's policy, a false notion constructed basically by those who orchestrated that very escalation. And chief among them would be Walt Rostow, who served as the National Security Council chief for Kennedy, till Kennedy put him out to pasture after 1 year, and then was immediately invited back into the lair by Lyndon Johnson. It is my belief that release of the files, particularly those files in the presidential libraries, both at Boston at the Kennedy Library and at Austin, Texas at the Johnson Library, will shed a great deal of light on this area and on other possible policy areas that we should be looking at, for example, Cuba and strategic arms and so on. And I look forward to talking to you in more detail on Sunday. Thank you.
Any questions for any people on the panel? Any general questions or specific questions? Or yes, sir.
Okay, question off the way. Say spoke with Colonel Pierre Fink a few weeks ago, and are you at liberty, since you've spoken with him before, do you give us some idea of his thoughts on this matter?
I knew Pierre Fink personally. When I met him, I was in the Air Force and went up to the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology to attend a forensic pathology seminar in '60 and then in '61. And then I was on a couple of programs as a lecturer thereafter, and during the year I was at Baltimore at the medical examiner's office, '61 to '62. So we were friends, not close buddies, but we were friends. And I'll never forget the American Academy of Forensic Sciences annual meeting in February of '65 here in Chicago at the Drake Hotel, where we used to convene religiously. That horrible time of the year. I'll never forget, we did the plenary session. That's how I get started on this business. I had been asked by the program chairman to represent the pathology section in what was the first time that any forensic scientific body had addressed the Warren Commission report. Shortly thereafter, I got calls from Sylvia Marr, who was one of the great women, one of the great people in this whole business, who regrettably is no longer with us, and then Josiah Thompson and so on. But I'll never forget, we talked that day, and I had breakfast with Pierre, and he was so sad and forlorn, and he said he only wished that he could talk and say things. He regretted so much what had happened. Pierre Fink has been portrayed, those of you who have read the JAMA sham, Humes and Boswell have the audacity to talk about Pierre Fink in a demeaning fashion. He didn't know anything. He didn't even recognize military paraphernalia, who was an admiral, who was a general, who was just dressed up in some Boy Scout uniform to receive the body, and so on. Pierre Fink was and is the quintessential European Swiss gentleman. He is knowledgeable, he is sharp, he is ethical, he is perceptive. Pierre Fink knew very well who was a general and who was an admiral. Pierre Fink testified under oath in the Clay Shaw trial. He didn't want to answer the question. The judge instructed him to answer when he was asked who was in charge and was anybody giving orders, and did anybody tell you and the other pathologist not to dissect out the wounds in the back and the throat? And his answer was yes. There was a general in the autopsy room who so instructed them. Humes and Boswell, via Lundberg, their mouthpiece now, tell us that they were in charge. Humes says, as he pounds his chest in absentia, he was in charge. Pierre Fink lied, in other words, under oath. Maybe that's why Pierre doesn't want to come back to America, because he's going to be charged with perjury. I'll leave it to you to determine whether Pierre Fink told the truth under oath in the Clay Shaw trial in '69, or whether Humes, retiring down there in the golf courses in Florida, is telling us the truth in 1992. Pierre has gotten older, told me he was very sick. He repeated that statement 3 times in the course of our conversation. Felt very sick. I did not push things. I told him, Pierre, nobody knows more about this than you, and I hope that you will think long and hard about talking to us. Maybe I'd like to come over and see you sometime myself. There are no definite plans. And CIA, there are no definite plans. I'm not going to see Pierre Fink in Switzerland. Dick, would you help me get that message out to your CIA friends? Dick likes to give out messages of the CIA. Gives him his son's address in Atlanta and everything. But so you know, there's nothing definite at this time, except that Pierre Fink would be an extremely important person to talk to us about these things. But the control was there. There's no question in the autopsy room. There's a lot more you'll be hearing in the next couple of days, I believe, about that with the very high-ranking people instructing them what to do and what not to do.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, 20 years ago or more now, Geraldo broadcast the mock trial of Harvey Oswald, which was rebroadcast on RCN this year. And I haven't seen it in '88, having gone back and looked at a summary of it by Paul Hogan in his excellent newsletter, It Was a Conspiracy. I was quite sure that one of the witnesses for the defense, one of the most impressive, had been Edwin Lopez, who referred to Jim Lazar, who wrote the 300-page report on Mexico City. Amazingly, I don't know if anyone was aware of it, but when Archibald came and rebroadcast the trial, he wasn't one of the witnesses. I don't know if everybody was
Does anyone know?
aware of that, but
He might have asked.
testimony was deleted from the trial. Does anybody know why?
He might have asked that it be deleted himself. I think he's been speaking to people. I know that he's passed around the research community the staff's certainty without quoting directly from his own work. He can't do that, or referring to it directly. That the staff of the House Select Committee on Assassinations established that the historic Lee Harvey Oswald was not in Mexico City, and that at least 2 men were, in fact, impersonating him, which means that Lee Harvey Oswald was, as he said, when in the custody of the Dallas police, patsied prior to the assassination. So that kind of record, so that's one of the most important pieces of evidence that we have. That's not only was not referred to, but it's now buried, and unless we reopen up the files, we won't get the Lopez report from the very staff that we paid the money for. Yes, anyone want to
Well,
comment?
just on that one document, Mr. G. Robert Blakey was quoted by Anthony Summers in his book Conspiracy as saying that that report was rightfully withheld and it should never be released, and that should tell us something about Mr. Blakey. That's probably one of the most important reports out there.
By the way, may I just make a point? That program, was done 2 years before. It was done in England. I was there, and then I chatted briefly with Lopez, and I heard his testimony. It was picked up by Geraldo Rivera, but the original program was done in England. They flew everybody over, including the American judge and the American jury. There's a lot of things that happened over there. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk about it later in the week. One final comment about Blakey, who has been referred to so frequently today. Nothing tells me more about the character of Blakey than the fact that it was he who was personally responsible for making sure that the acronym for the federally legislated act vis-a-vis organized crime came out to make damn sure that you knew was Italian. RICO is Blakey's creation.
Yeah, that's right.
Think about that. That's not a joke. That's for real.
One point I'd like to make in answer to what you just asked, and also to comment on what some other people said. There was indeed a gag order given by the House Assassinations Committee. As staff photographic consultant, I had to sign that order at the beginning. And it was a covenant that I would cooperate with them, that we all would. Cyril, I believe you had to sign that too. And I was one of the first to break that. And if they want to come get me, they know where I am. They did not keep their word to the American people. They did not tell the truth. But something that Cyril said a few moments ago, and was brought to mind by the question you asked. In the British special, On Trial Lee Harvey Oswald, Paul O'Connor, who was present in the autopsy room, was asked the same question that Pierre Fink was asked in the Garrison trial, the Garrison Shaw trial. He said, was there military control of the autopsy? He said yes. But then he answered the question that Pierre Fink, under gag order from the Department of the Navy, could not answer. He wanted to know, Jerry Spence, who was the defense attorney for Lee Harvey Oswald, ostensibly, asked who gave the order. And for the first time in the history of this case, we found out who ordered the autopsy physicians not to probe the wounds and to find out who was controlling the autopsy. And it was Admiral George Gregory Berkeley, the president's personal physician, the only medical person to view the body in both Bethesda and Parkland. It's a shame that George Berkeley has died. He died 2 years ago. I would love to have gotten him on the stand to find out what he really did know. Thank you.
Some of you may not know, but across the United States, people are beginning to talk about the assassination. Just this past year, I was at Franklin Pierce Law Center, the smallest and in many ways one of the most prestigious law schools in the United States, in Concord, New Hampshire. I was on a panel on the JFK assassination with Francis X. O'Neill, a lawyer, legislator, and one of the two people at the autopsy representing the interests of J. Edgar Hoover and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In the Seibert O'Neill report, Francis X. O'Neill said that the doctors immediately indicated, and he recorded it, that there had been surgery done to the top of the president's head, number one. Number two, Humes apparently was uncertain as to how many wounds had been induced on the body, and he in fact called Malcolm Perry about possibly induced wounds to the body. But most of all, Francis X. O'Neill, who carries the bound copy of the Warren Report as if it were both Old and New Testament, to every meeting that he comes to, will tell you, and if you call him up in Connecticut, he will tell you that he does not believe in the single bullet theory, and the wound that he observed and the two doctors observed in the back of the president at Bethesda was a shallow, non-penetrating wound. That means 4 shots, that means 2 rifles, that means conspiracy. So we have people talking all over the United States who were directly involved in developing the evidence, who are now denying the evidence. Check it out with former FBI agent Francis X. O'Neill.
I got a lot of new evidence presented that we can talk about later. I'll be here for the next couple of days. But I talked to Paul O'Connor down in Florida, and I've got copies of the pictures at home and everything. And I looked at the picture, the so-called autopsy pictures, and I couldn't see any hole at all in the back of Kennedy's head. And Paul made notes on these pictures of things that disturbed him. Like there's talk that the room's full of people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in those autopsy reports, you know,
It's empty.
See anybody else. And he said he didn't recognize things in that room, so that wasn't the same room we were in. And the table looked
Correct.
different instrument table.
Correct.
The lighting looked like it was taken in a dark room with a flash because everything around it seemed dark. It's so bizarre. It looks like they were taken.
Yeah.
Pictures taken by people who thought they were supposed to be there.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about that. Bob Groden will be talking about it. Our doctors will be talking about it. One thing you have to know, and that is Dr. Humes gave us a logical impossibility and then asked us to think about it. He said there is absolutely no question but that a wound both entered from behind and exited from behind in the president's body. That's a physical impossibility. And he also said, check the beveling. That's the secret of it all. The only photograph that shows any beveling whatsoever is beveling that indicates an exit wound in the back of the head. What Humes was talking about in terms of an entrance wound was beveling on a piece of bone that was brought into the autopsy and not part of the head. So you have some very interesting comments made by Dr. Humes, who under pressure may be very well telling us some interesting truths that he would not like to pursue very much more. Would either the doctors like to comment on the questions raised?
We're going to be doing it on Sunday.
Right. Any more questions or comments?
I'd like to ask Dick Gregory about an assertion made by Mark Lane in his book Plausible Denial relating to Congressman Stokes, and this had particularly about the assassination of Dr. King. But it relates to Congressman Stokes' orientation. Stokes, of course, is the chairman of the House Select Committee and instrumental in bringing in G. Robert Blakey as the chief counsel. And according to this, at a private meeting between you and Congressman Stokes and Mark Lane in Lane's Washington home, across from the Supreme Court, you prayed together, and you prayed that the truth come out about the King assassination. And Congressman Stokes said, but we already know the truth, that we know that the FBI was involved in the assassination of Dr. King, and you said then Martin would have wanted us to be strong and reveal this, and Congressman Stokes said, yes, and look what happened to Martin. Is that true?
No, it's not true. It was Walter Fauntleroy. Stokes wasn't there. And in the book, it was Walter Fauntleroy, Congressman Fauntleroy, not Congressman Stokes. And in the book it says Fauntleroy. Yeah. No, it was. If you go back and read the book, it wasn't.
Fauntleroy's position was at the time?
Just what you said. You just changed the name. Say it over again, but just say the name different. It was not Congressman Stokes. It was Walter Fauntleroy. Was in the room. We all prayed together. When every time I got with them cats, I prayed. Like I'm praying now. No, it is true. But the truth is going to come out, you know, and it's coming out now, and it's coming out, and this is what we hear. Before, you couldn't do this here. We charging $55 for tonight's dinner, and people coming. Thank God to the movie. And then again, the one thing the movie did is it took a bunch of researchers who's been trashed. You think you was trash. You think y'all was trash. Think what they've been through. I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, to have all of this, honest, here's a brother here, a doctor, everybody like him, and he have nothing to worry about. He got him a season's pass to the Steelers, and I pick up the paper one day and read where they say he's doing a whole lot of something. They say he peed on an old lady or something, whatever. But it will come out, and then again we have to stop. One of the things we have to understand. There's a whole lots of people, man, be they Congress folks or doctors, that don't have their strength. and can get reduced down to pressure. The great story, and I guess if I had to one day when all of them pass away write something on their tombstones, would be they wore the magic glasses. And there's one very important thing about wearing magic glasses. Don't force nobody else to wear them, and have patience for your friends and brothers and sisters and family members that never had the magic glasses on. They have a wealth of information that they didn't buckle under. They know a lot of people who died and what have you, but they stayed. This brother here, Groden, walked down the street with his wife and his children, and they had him so messed up, he was silly most of the time. And you didn't know when you was going to die, and you really cared about it. You didn't know when they was going to set up your family or put drugs on you or what have you. Well, one thing now, they safe. Y'all could use dope legitimately now and get busted. I wouldn't believe it. But I mean, and so I say, you know, all of those early writings, and y'all really made my job easy. My job was really, I was a celebrity, I was a comic, I was an entertainer, and I had thousands of people would come see me, and I would just talk about the assassination because I didn't have no peers. No doctors could say nothing to me. My peers was entertainers. Who cared what they say? Excuse me. And so consequently, I was able to take information. I was able to get on the phone, call one another and say, hey, sometimes I use information, didn't say it was y'all because I didn't want to get y'all killed. But I'm saying that the people have the information and they kept that fire burning and kept that fire burning and kept that fire. But I feel sorry for this brother here that had to go all of that time and not know when his family would be wiped out. And this was the game that was played. But one of the things we have to understand, that there's a whole lots of people. This is the mightiest government in the history of the planet. And when this government look you in the face and tell you, there's a whole lots of people would buck to that. Look what we did to Russia. Look what we did to Germany. I mean, we make nations behave. And so, and then you got the press sitting out here with a whole lot of misinformation. Not you little reporters. Y'all just report the stuff. When you bring this stuff in, they ain't gonna run it. And ain't a damn thing you're going to do about it. When LBJ told Walter Cronkite he didn't believe Lee Harvey Oswald was the loner saying that he thought it was a conspiracy, and weeks later, he was dead. And what I saw in that death, I mean, you ain't got too many good hospitals in the South. Right. That's right. But one of the better heart hospitals is in Austin, Texas. And Johnson City, Texas is 15 minutes from Austin, Texas. They took Johnson all the way across the state to Brooke Army Hospital, which is the #1 burn hospital in the world. And so when you sit and you look, and then when it comes time to run the stuff, it was deleted. And when I confront Walter Cronkite, Uncle Walty, Mr. Integrity, he said it wasn't me, CBS made that decision. But my grandmother don't trust CBS. My grandmother trusts you, white boy, and you lied to her. Okay? And that's what the game was. Okay? And so... So when you have this type of power, see, I'm one of those that do not believe we was in Vietnam. And if anybody's stupid enough to believe we couldn't have whooped their ass, you crazy. You crazy. You talk all that old crazy crap if you want. We could have bummed them out. Okay? But this is a whole lot of stuff where a whole bunch of people who ain't going to do nothing want to sell wolf tickets with little weak folks. Let me tell you what that whole war was about. It was about a rice bowl, and we won it. Cambodia, Indonesia, Burma, Laos, Vietnam was the rice bowl for the world. We wiped it out. Now the rice bowl is Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, and California. And we can bring Asia to his knees in the morning by cutting off the rice. That's what that was about. And Kennedy might have not even known about it. But that's what we did. And when you look at all of that other stuff, we went over there to control people's dinner, and we control it. 80% of the rice that goes over to the Far East now comes from America. And that's what the game was about. And so when you sit and you look at all of it will eventually come out because thank God there is a God. Hitler found it out. Napoleon found it out. And there's a bunch of decent people that gets picked that's at the right place at the right time. Who knows who's going to be the hero of this? One of these dogs that we stand up talking about now might get the message and come and set the whole world on fire. But who cares as long as it happens? And I tell all my Jewish friends and my Muslim friends who live in America, get you a Christian Bible. Now, I know you're not Christian. I got these Muslim cousins. Used to be a Christian, but he changed. Told me, I don't need to read no Christian Bible. I get up in the morning and face the east when you right, but you pays your rent in the west, boy. And in that Christian Bible, 2 Timothy 1:7, this is not the CIA talking, this is not the FBI, this is not the military, this is not Russia, this is not rich folks. This is the boss that say, I did not give you a spirit of fear. And they're good examples of that. But I give you power. Now when God tell you that, that supersedes all these other nuts. And I give you love, and I give you a sound mind. That's what the game is all about. And if you don't believe it can happen, ask Richard Nixon, a little bitty old insignificant black man, okay, that probably couldn't spell Watergate, brought them down to their knees. Because there's also something in that Christian Bible that says, not by your power, not by your might, but by my spirit. And I'm so thrilled to be here because I see God's spirit. I see it up here. I went to the movie and I looked at that whole spirit that set America on fire, irregardless to what the press said, and irregardless to how bad they trashed him. And because of that, books that some of y'all wrote 20 years ago is selling better now. That's what it's about. And you will never put this back in the lid. You will never put it back. And them same television networks that wouldn't run nothing is popular, and you can sell good commercials now, and they coming up with stuff they didn't hid in the can for 20 years. Because all you got to do now is say CIA, LBJ assassination, and everybody starts looking, and it's going to open up all them other assassinations. And all them, and before it's over, Willie Smith assassination. I don't know who he is, but I'm sure they killed him. Okay? And so I just say, I just thank God I'm alive. And all of the sex stuff they tried to get on. Now, I ain't going to lie. I'm going to say this and I'm going to sit down. There was a lot of folks scared of sex scandals. I wasn't. I used to cut out beautiful black women out of Jet and Ebony and send them to Hoover. And say, if you can get any one of these, I'll be in Cleveland for 2 weeks. Matter of fact, if you can get Helene Tucker, you can give the agent the night off. Just show me where the button is, and I'll kick that camera on myself, Because what you going to do with it? You can't run on NBC, and my old lady ain't going to believe it. And it's just a wonderful feeling to think, I'm a 60-year-old black man born 1932 in the ghetto on welfare and have carried myself in such a way, thanks to you all, that my sex file is in the archive. Sandwiched in between, I hope, World War I and World War II. And 50 years from now, I'll be able to say to my great-grandchildren, go check out my sex files and let me see if my style have changed, right? Finally, let me just say something to these folks you see sitting here and the ones that's not here, and to all of these folks that have all this information. It might be 2,000 years from now, but as long as there's somebody on this planet that talks about ethics and integrity, these are going to be the names that we're going to hear. We're not going to hear about the Blakeys and all them clowns. Years from now, won't nobody even know who the CIA was. Won't nobody know who J. Edgar Hoover was, and won't nobody even care, because filth should not be remembered. But one day, these are the names. These are the books that people are going to have to go to the library. These are the documentary films that people are going to have to go and dig up. And thank God we got it this time. We didn't have it on Lincoln. But we have it now. And stuff that's been ignored. What does it say in the Christian Bible again? The stone that was rejected by the builder, God said this will be the cornerstone for the new house. Well, what have happened here? This will be the cornerstone for the new order. A bunch of new heroes. When I sit and look at the way they trashed that movie, but the same press played up John Gotti like he was some kind of goddamn folk hero at the same time. At the same time. And then 1,000 people stood out in front of him being sentenced. tore up the damn court building, turned up. Not one of them was shot, and I don't want to see nobody shot. But had that been some goddamn black folks doing the same thing over some nigger drug pusher, 50 of them would have been dead. All right? And that's why King was killed and Malcolm was killed, and we kept trying to tell all you white folks in America, if you turn your back on that, none of y'all going to be safe. And one day we're going to have to look and see how many CIA agents was wiped out and how many FBI agents was wiped out. And so I say to you today that I cannot say thanks. These are the heroes. They don't have no black walls of marble with their names on it, but one day it will be. And for those of you that wrote and it's there and it can never be changed, I just personally, as a father with 10 black children and grandchildren who got a stake in this here, I cannot thank you enough, and thank God you held on long enough for you all to take over, because that's what it's about. It was about making it glamorous and finding out that a whole lots of money could be made. And now everybody that looked like they got something, they can sell it now. And it's going to happen in 10 years from now, the bad stuff will never sell. And so again, we just say thank. And Earl Warren, we're going to have to praise him one day, because he didn't lie to the folks that's dead. He said, never in your lifetime will you ever find out. Now, you can't ask nobody to be any more honest than that. But he didn't know about y'all. So now, if he come back, we will say, ha ha, in our lifetime. What he should have said was never in his lifetime. Thank you.
Just a note on Dick Gregory from Bob Groden.
I want to add one thing very quickly. You're a tough act to follow, Greg. Well, you succeed. There's people up on this stage who I admire tremendously, and you all know who you are. But I want to tell all of you who may not be aware, everybody points to that evening in 1975 when I had the honor of showing the Zapruder film on national television for the first time. The person who made that available, the person who made that possibility happen was Dick Gregory. This country would not have seen the Zapruder film, would not have seen the work I was able to do on it if it had not been for this man. And we all owe him a debt of gratitude we will never be able to repay. So, Greg, thank you.
Let me just, you know, I hate to get credit for something I shouldn't get credit for. I guess the Zapruder film was stolen. So I just write my stuff off. People say, where you get your information from? I said, well, you know, black folks is the janitors all over the world. I'm sitting home here in Chicago minding my own business with my wife and family, and here white folks come up with some stuff they done stole that'll get everybody killed. They say, you want to see this? And I look at it, oh my God, where'd you get that? He said, oh, I said, oh God. So I had to get it out to protect us all. And so in all honesty, we have to say to Geraldo, because I mean, I could make the phone call and I could deliver it, but this is what brought it. And then a whole lot of stuff that Geraldo had already read. We didn't just take that to him cold. He had read a whole lot of stuff, and that made our credibility. And it was Geraldo that had the guts to run that on nationwide TV. So actually what he ran was stolen property. And after he ran that, it didn't run no more. But it did get out there, and the American people did get to see it. And I just say, you know, thank God. That was one of the few times in my lifetime television was used right. And so again, you know, when you look at this mix, this whole stew, there was a whole lots of people that put a whole lots of stuff into it that make it work right. But Geraldo, had he not had the benefit of a whole lot of people's work, and we just brought him some cold film, and he would have been ignorant of what was happening, it never would have ran. And so that's the power of God, not the power of individual. And a lot of the stuff that got out there that y'all see getting out there, that shocks you sometimes. When this brother stood up, I'm shocked. You know? But that's the power of God. And that power haven't died. And you'll see that power in full force this weekend. I'm shocked when I get a phone call from Chicago and say this meeting is going on. And it's going to happen all over. And for those of you that's here, get on the phone and call, because if this meeting's a big success, especially financially, it will happen all over this country. And that's where things is going to change. When we set this country on fire with information and put it at people's fingertips, not just a handful of folks, not just a handful of researchers, not just a handful of folks that can pay $55, but I'm talking about put it out there so the American people can hear it. Because once the common, everyday people start questioning something this important, they'll start questioning local stuff. And they'll start questioning little things that they see on TV. And once this thing breaks wide open, which is fixing to, then CBS and ABC and all of the news are going to be in trouble, because for the first time, ordinary people are going to start questioning what they see. Because the worst thing you can do is trick poor folks, and then they find out they've been tricked, because they'll never forgive you for that. And that's what is about to happen now, thanks to the work of a whole lot of decent folks.
We have to get this group back to their hotel so that they can get back to the Marriott so we can hear more Dick Gregory and Jim Wright and Ed Asner. But let's take just a few more questions. I think you had a question.
I asked this question purely out of curiosity. We've heard a lot of things about the autopsy. We've just heard a lot of things about x-rays not matching. I'd like to address this question to Dr. Crenshaw and Mr. Verbal. Has anyone ever seen the autopsy of J.D. Tippit? Has anyone ever seen the x-rays of J.D. Tippit's skull? I ask it out of curiosity because I think it's very coincidental that the president was killed by a head wound. J.D. Tippit was killed by a head wound. I have never seen one document relating to the autopsy of J.D. Tippit.
Very interesting point. Very interesting point. And if you're looking at things, I myself never got into that. You were over at Parkland.
Yeah, but I never saw it.
But that's an interesting point.
We have a face that doesn't match the x-rays. And I ask questions very often on instinct, and my instinct brings forth very interesting.
You ask, it is a very interesting question because in the 48 hours after the assassination, a rumor began that J.D. Tippit, in fact, was used to impersonate John Kennedy. And I thought that was one of those things that you just absolutely rejected. But your question is interesting. You're suggesting the possibility that the Tippit x-rays may have, in fact, been substituted.
I understand that Tippit was shot as he was walking out of
In the
the
head.
car by the left front wheel.
Can they see?
The assassin was on the right. He took 2 bullets to the head and the brain, and then the other 2 bullets were in his torso. But I have never had a satisfactory answer as to who conducted the autopsy, where the records are, was there an x-ray. Another thing I'd like to ask is that the experts check out the ear in that photograph that Mr. Groth was showing us in the back of the head where no damage seems to have been done. It seems like the doctor. The ear is as
Like a fingerprint. So there are enough researchers here, apprentice and old hands, to pick up on those questions. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
I had a question. I was in Dallas about a month ago, and I spoke to so-and-so in newspaper, and he claimed that there was a big meeting the night before the assassination that Nixon was at, and Hoover was at, and powerful people in this country. Will you talk about that alleged meeting?
Apparently they were all in town. Now, let me ask our LBJ man, who was in town the night of the 21st?
Nixon was in town speaking at, don't get me wrong, it was either Pepsi or Coke, one of the two.
Pepsi.
Now, there are some allegations that there was a meeting involved with Nixon and other people. In terms of what I've discovered, I haven't found anything in terms of some nefarious meeting occurring. Of course, we could maybe ask Richard Nixon.
Right.
Yeah.
Aren't they at the Richardsons?
Yeah, that was Ben Jones.
Okay, we're going to take one last question and then...
Nixon and Hoover were purposely held the night before the assassination. He said that he admitted it wasn't firsthand, but that was reliable. No other author has confirmed that.
I wanted to talk about Bobby Kennedy's assassination for a quick minute. I think Ted Chirac was supposed to be there for that. I don't know.
He's earlier scheduled. He's not appearing.
There's supposed to be. I read a book by Phil Millicent, and I've been hearing this buzz rumor that there's supposed to be an audio tape of the shooting that has more than sir had take shots on it?
It's not a rumor. There's sufficient evidence. Oh, yes, there's sufficient audio evidence. Well, I would check with Philip Melanson in Massachusetts. He's, I think, probably now our nation's leading expert on the RFK assassination.
Do you have any knowledge that's supposed to have gone to the LA grand jury that's trying to reopen it?
All the evidence was denied, if I'm not mistaken. That was a group that included Oliver Stone, Paul Schrade, etc. Come on up.
Just briefly. A group of citizens had submitted a request to the Los Angeles grand jury to investigate aspects of police misconduct in connection with the RFK investigation. The grand jury rather perfunctorily denied that request. The request was a rather lengthy document supported by 800 pages of documents and exhibits. The request is going to be resubmitted to the new grand jury shortly.
Thank you.
Yeah. In the name of the Committee to Reopen the Files and the Assassination Archives and Research Center, the independent researchers here, all of us, I really would like to thank Doug Carlson. An incredible job. So well done. And it's only begun.
Let me say thank you and God bless you. The thrills we used to always have when I would listen to my brother, and as a comic and a humorist, I knew you all were in for a good treat, because we've heard about this great politician, and few people that's not aware of him know he's one of the greatest storytellers. And it's just beautiful to be here to listen. Let me say to those of you who paid to come in and eat, I'm going to do something very uncool, but I'm going to forget you for a few minutes. And I got to thinking about I very seldom get in a room with so many people who made things happen. And it's the cause of things happen, and the pain and the anguish. Oh, we got a great movie out now, and all of America's looking, but when you look at the faces of these people and the ones you're going to be seeing for the next 3 days, it's a hell of a thing when they never knew when they walked down the street if they was going to live or die. It's a heck of a thing when you walk out the house. See, it's one thing understanding America who's locked into greed and money and racism and sexism. It's another thing when you know you messing with the CIA and the FBI that will blow you away. That's what they have there. These folks you're looking at on fools, they know what's going down. When I sit and look at my brother Sherman Skolnick and all of the things that he was doing, how frightened he used to be, and I'm honored I was the first one that got him put in jail. We were out, the whole town was upset. They said, who did it? I said, that wife on that wheelchair. And I kind of thought, how can I say thanks to you before I say to the group gathered here what I want to say? And I called a friend of mine who was on her way out of town, and I said, I just want you just to come and say thanks to some personal friends of America and some personal friends of the whole world. And so I just want to step back for a minute and ask my friend Felicia Coleman to come up. And I want, as you listen to what she says, to you, no one else, I want you to think about those cold nights, the misery, the insults, the nasty stuff that the press said about you and all of that, and you knew you was right. Even had people in your own house question your sanity. But we made it to this day. And I want you and your friends just to hear my gift to you. Felicia.
If I can I can bring back beauty in this world that's so bright, if I can't spread the message that our master has taught, then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be shall not be in vain. If I can help somebody as I pass along, then my living shall not be in vain. Oh, my living shall not be can help somebody as I pass along, then my
Felicia, thank you. And to those of you who have labored and worked so hard, that's just my little simple way of saying thanks to you and your families. I have 10 children, and the young one I told tonight that I was coming here to be with some fantastic friends, and called off Jim Wright, Ed Asner, and my young son said, "Dad, I wish I could be you." I said, "Oh, come on, man, I'm 60 years old. If I could be your age again," and I'm not one of these old broken down has-beens that's, wish I could be young again just to be young again. I just wish I could be young again because it's just so exciting passing out free condoms in school. I mean, free condoms in school. Damn, when I was in school, they just started free lunches. And I know they passed out lunches because they wanted us to eat. They're passing out condoms now. Magic Johnson needed some. He missed it. He didn't understand safe sex. He's a hero. Pee Wee Herman understands safe sex. He went to jail. Hey, I got 3 sons. I tell them, follow Pee Wee, baby. African American progress, big debate. Are we making progress? Black man asked me that the other day. I walked away. First I came back, I said, well, maybe he's from another planet. Because if he's from here, that's a stupid question. So I went back and I said, progress? Are you aware it used to be called Negro History Week? Now it's called Black Month? Tell me about progress. Because wouldn't you know, when they get ready to give us a month, be that month of February, all them days missing. You know, I never expected them to give us a 31-dayer, you know what I mean? I was stunned when they laid February on us. Because most African Americans I know, not only do we not like February, we don't even understand it. The hell is a groundhog? On Groundhog Day, if the groundhog sees his shadow, 6 more weeks of winter. Now tell that to somebody living in San Diego. Last February the 2nd, I was in New York City doing a radio show. A white dude said, today's Groundhog Day. What do you think gonna happen if the groundhog sees his shadow? I said, back up, chump. I don't play that mess. White boy got upset. What are you, anti-social, anti-American? What do you mean? I didn't know you feel that way. You feel that way about it? Ask me again, I'll play it. So today's Groundhog Day. What do you think will happen if the groundhog sees his shadow, boy? I said, 6 more weeks of winter, sir. Since we're gonna play it, let's keep on playing it. Suppose the groundhog come out today and don't see a shadow, but see 5 black dudes. What do that mean? He said, I don't know. I said, 6 more weeks of basketball, chump. You know, we make such a difficult thing out of this whole race relation and what's going on in America. It just simply breaks down to asking one another questions. I have a company, whites work for me, and I asked them questions, they asked me questions. I was asking some white folks some questions this morning on the plane. I said, why is it when I was born I was black, when I grew up I was black, when I get sick I'm black, when I lay in the sun all week I'm black, and when I die I'm gonna be black. Now look at you white folks, you're born pink, you grow up you turn white, you get sick you turn green, you lay in the sun all week you turn red, you get cold in the wintertime you turn blue, and when you die you turn purple, and y'all wanna call me colored? Let me first say to those of you that's responsible for this evening, my job's very easy. All I have to do is just produce a body, but somebody put a whole lot of work into making tonight and this weekend happen. So for those of you that's responsible, we take time to say to you, thank you. Secondly, let me say to those of you who's taking care of the physical part, someone fixed the food, they served us, someone set this room up, someone's going to be sitting up stuff and breaking down and cleaning up behind us this whole weekend. So those of you that's responsible for the physical part of making this happen, we say to you, thank you. And lastly, to those of you who decided to put your energy together and come out and share this, because had you not made that decision, the rest of it wouldn't have mattered. So to you and all of you, we say to you, thank you. God bless you. You know, I sit and I listen to my brother Jim. I listened as he so eloquently talked about this president that many of us heard of and knew from the press, but personally. I mean, we sit here and shared something tonight, inside. What those last few minutes was like, what it was like as a friend. And we come here knowing things. And I dug up an old speech by Abraham Lincoln because I never really understood who this man was until I read this speech accidentally one day. Gave it in Edwardsville, Illinois in 1858 when he was president. I want you to listen to this, and I want you to think about this man who was shot in Dallas. I want you to think about what just happened in LA. I want you to see the rioting, and I want you to see the panic. I want you to think about racism and sexism, and I want you to hear what Abraham Lincoln said. And I'm sure after reading what he said here, he wouldn't be surprised of what happened in Dallas. Might wonder what took it so long. He wouldn't be surprised of what happened in LA. Here's what he said. In Edwardsville, Illinois, in 1858. And he wasn't talking to us. There were no blacks in that room in 1858. He said this to white folks. When you have succeeded in dehumanizing the Negro, when you have put him down and made it forever impossible for him to be but as the beast of the field, when you have extinguished his soul and placed him where the ray of hope is blown out as in the darkness of the damned, are you quite sure the demon you have aroused will not turn and rend you? And then he didn't stop there, he went on. He said, our reliance is in the love of liberty that God has placed in our bosoms. Our defense is in the preservation of the spirit which prizes liberty as the heritage of all men in all lands everywhere. Destroy this spirit and you have planted the seeds of despotism around your doorstep. Familiarize your own self with the chains of bondage and prepare your own limbs to wear them. Accustomed to trampling on the rights of others, you have lost the genius of your own independence and become the fit subject for the first cunning tyrant who rises among you. He said that way back then. Way back then, he said that. Before he was president, we'd flip out over the Gettysburg Address. This man told us way back then, keep your behavior pattern and see what happens. And now we're here tonight, not just to talk about a president that's been wiped out, his brother, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. These are the ones we know about. These are the ones we know about. These are the ones we know. These are the ones it's safe to talk about. It's not safe yet to talk about 007. And how Richard Nixon was on that plane when it left New York, sitting across from the Congressman McDonald, who had some sex films he got from the LAPD. And when the deal was cut some kind of way, that plane landed at Andrews Air Base. And that's why you researchers can't trace it. You say Nixon got off at Anchorage. He didn't. Andrews Air Base, he got off. And then it was blown out the sky. So y'all go on and play your games. Go on and play your games, America. Pan Am Flight 103, the niggers did it. Yeah, the niggers did it. And we doubled the guard at the airport because y'all scared of niggers. And while everybody was waiting on them Arabs to do something, them white folks from Belfast went into London and damn near leveled 10 Downing Street to the ground. Y'all go and play your games, eh? Okay. And then your white American press, your nasty press, did not tell you that Pan Am Flight 103 had 8 CIA agents on. No, I take that back. Excuse me, press. I take it back. Yo, damn freedom. One paper, Pittsburgh Press. One damn news, not the Washington Post, not the LA, not the Chicago Tribune, the Pittsburgh Press. On November the 6th, 1987, front page headline, CIA tied to jet bombing, and they printed a picture of one of the 8 Americans, CIA agents that was on that damn plane. And now, last month, the great Time magazine comes out and want to talk about it. Those 8 agents was on the plane because they was coming back to testify before your Congress about how they running drugs in America. Y'all go on and play your games, but you better play them quick and you better play them fast because your recess is just about over.